The most frightening stage of dealing with a toxic person is often not the loud arguments or the explosive anger. It is the quiet moment when they finally realize that you are truly gone and that this time you are not coming back. That realization does not always create the dramatic reaction people expect. They do not always chase after you. They do not always beg for another chance. They do not always lose control in obvious ways. Instead, they often shift into something much more careful and much more deliberate. It is a change that many people experience but struggle to explain. If this feels familiar, keep watching, because understanding this pattern is not about getting revenge. It is about reclaiming your freedom. The moment they accept that your decision is real, the first emotion they experience is a deep sense of losing control. For someone like this, control is not simply part of the relationship. It is the foundation of the relationship. It is how they manage their emotions, protect the image they have of themselves, and avoid facing the emptiness they carry inside. As long as they believe there is even a small chance that you might come back, argue with them, explain yourself, or react emotionally, they still feel connected to you in a way that gives them confidence. The moment they realize that possibility is gone, that sense of control disappears with it. This creates a serious psychological shock because their entire way of relating to other people depends on believing they can influence thoughts, feelings, and behavior. When you stop responding, stop explaining, and stop revolving around their emotional world, they are forced to face something they spend their lives avoiding. They are no longer in control. Stay with me because this next part reveals what happens inside their mind after that realization takes hold. Emotionally healthy people understand that sometimes life brings situations they cannot control, and they learn to accept that reality. A toxic person often struggles with that experience. Feeling powerless can trigger intense shame, deep insecurity, and emotional instability. Losing control also challenges the story they constantly tell themselves about being more important, more desirable, or more powerful than everyone else. When you find the strength to walk away and stay away, it quietly proves that their influence was never as complete as they believed. Your absence becomes evidence that they could not control everything after all. Rather than reflecting on that truth or considering their own behavior, they quickly build new stories to protect their ego. They may convince themselves that you never mattered, tell others they were the one who ended things, or rewrite the past until it matches the version that makes them feel stronger. These are not simply random lies. They are psychological defenses designed to shield them from uncomfortable reality. What makes this period especially difficult for them is that there is no easy solution. They cannot charm you back if you refuse contact. They cannot manipulate conversations that no longer happen. They cannot create arguments when you no longer participate. Without access to you, they are left sitting with thoughts they cannot easily escape. That pressure often appears as stubbornness, emotional distance, or quiet resentment. From the outside, they may seem completely unaffected, but much of that behavior is an attempt to convince themselves they still have the upper hand. Don't miss what comes next, because this is where their behavior often becomes much more subtle. Once they decide that contacting you directly carries too much risk because you might reject them, they often move into a stage of silent observation. This is not driven by healthy love or genuine nostalgia. It usually comes from anxiety, entitlement, and the desire to feel informed without exposing themselves to rejection. Reaching out would require accepting that you now make your own decisions and live your own life. That independence is deeply uncomfortable for them. Watching from a distance feels much safer. They may quietly check your social media, notice who comments on your posts, or ask mutual friends casual questions about how you are doing. Sometimes these actions are subtle. Other times they become persistent. What matters most is the reason behind them. They are looking for signs that you are struggling, waiting, or missing them. If they discover that you are genuinely peaceful, growing stronger, or enjoying your life without them, it challenges one of the beliefs they relied on for so long. They wanted to believe you could not truly move forward without them. Seeing evidence that you have done exactly that creates deep frustration because it contradicts the story they told themselves. At the same time, they are also watching for moments when you might feel vulnerable. A difficult breakup, the loss of someone close, or even a sad message shared online may look like an opportunity to reconnect. That is one reason they sometimes return months or even years later. To them, time does not always mean the connection has ended. They often see it as another chance to test whether the old door might still open. There is another side to this silence as well. By refusing direct communication while quietly observing from a distance, they sometimes hope you will wonder about them, think about them, or question what they are doing. Their silence becomes another attempt to influence your emotions without openly participating in your life. It is not true absence. It is an effort to maintain psychological influence through distance. Much of this behavior is driven by a lasting sense of entitlement. They may believe they still deserve to know what is happening in your life simply because they were once part of it. Even after you leave, that feeling of ownership can remain. Watching from a distance allows them to avoid responsibility while holding on to the illusion that they still matter. When they finally accept that you are not coming back, they often stop trying to immediately pull you back into the relationship. Instead, they wait. They believe timing can sometimes accomplish what direct pressure could not. And that waiting period often becomes the beginning of their next attempt to regain influence, carefully choosing a moment when they think your defenses might be lower than before. If they reach out too soon, they risk hearing the one answer they fear the most: rejection. Another rejection would force them to face the reality that they no longer have influence over you. That is why many of them choose to wait. In their mind, time works in their favor. They believe that as weeks or months pass, your boundaries will naturally become weaker. They assume your memories will soften and that your emotions will eventually make room for them again. This delayed return is not usually driven by love or genuine understanding. It grows out of entitlement. They often see past relationships very differently from emotionally healthy people. To them, a relationship is not always something that truly ends. Instead, they may view it as something they can set aside until they decide it is useful again. Even years later, they can feel completely justified in appearing without warning because they never fully accepted that the relationship belonged equally to both people. In their mind, it simply stopped working for a while and can be restarted whenever the timing feels right. Waiting also allows them to protect their ego. It helps them maintain the fantasy that they can step back into your life whenever they choose. When they finally do reach out, the approach is usually quiet rather than dramatic. It might be a simple message that seems harmless, a reminder of an old memory, an apology that sounds sincere but avoids real responsibility, or even a sudden personal problem meant to awaken your sympathy. Their tone is often softer because they have already learned that anger or aggression did not bring the result they wanted. They are not truly testing whether the relationship can be repaired. They are testing something much smaller but far more important to them. They want to know whether you will respond at all. Even a short reply, whether kind or angry, tells them that some level of emotional access still exists. Stay with me because this next piece explains why those quiet messages often arrive after so much time has passed. The long period of silence also gives them the opportunity to rewrite the past inside their own mind. As time passes, they begin convincing themselves that the arguments were not as serious as they really were. They may decide that both people were equally responsible or imagine that the problem somehow disappeared on their own. This version of history protects them from guilt and makes it much easier to contact you again. Instead of seeing themselves as someone who caused deep emotional pain, they begin viewing themselves as an innocent part of your past, simply saying hello. At the same time, another process often begins. They become increasingly focused on repairing the image they present to other people. This is not the same as personal growth or honest self-reflection. It is usually another way of protecting a wounded ego. Your decision to leave creates a crack in the story they like the world to believe about them. The idea that someone walked away from them can feel unbearable because it challenges the identity they worked so hard to build. Rather than examining their own behavior, they shift their attention toward changing how others see the breakup. Appearances become more important than truth. Conversations about you slowly begin changing. Important details disappear. Events are rearranged. Facts become distorted. They may describe you as overly emotional, impossible to satisfy, unstable, or unfair. Surprisingly, these stories are not always told with obvious anger. They are often shared in a calm, disappointed, or even sorrowful voice because they may genuinely believe the version of events they have created. The purpose is not to understand what really happened. The purpose is to erase any story where they must accept responsibility. Facing that kind of shame feels too painful, so they replace it with a story that protects them instead. Repairing their public image also serves another purpose. It allows them to feel that they still have influence over the people around them. By shaping the story of the breakup, they try to shape how others think, feel, and respond. Every sympathetic conversation, every supportive comment, and every person who believes their version becomes another source of validation. That outside approval temporarily supports the fragile confidence they struggle to maintain. The longer you remain silent, the more determined they may become to control that narrative. Your refusal to argue, defend yourself, or publicly explain your side means there is little standing in the way of the version they choose to tell. Without your voice correcting the story, they may feel free to create a one-sided picture that benefits them. That can feel deeply unfair when you know what really happened behind closed doors. Yet this is also where your silence carries its greatest strength. You are no longer spending your energy proving your truth to someone committed to misunderstanding it. Instead of remaining trapped in endless explanations, you are investing that energy into rebuilding your own life. Over time, the opinions that once felt so important begin losing their power because your peace no longer depends on winning someone else's approval. The people who truly know your character will recognize consistency over performance, while those determined to believe a distorted story were unlikely to be convinced by endless explanations anyway. In the end, your quiet becomes more powerful than any argument because it allows your actions, your healing, and your future to speak far louder than words ever could. And that is often the one thing they never expected. It is important to remember that a toxic person rarely sees your silence as a sign of strength, maturity, or self-respect. Instead, they often interpret it as permission to shape the story however they want. During this stage, you may notice sudden displays of happiness, dramatic success stories, or public acts designed to make them appear unusually kind and generous. These performances are not reliable signs that they have found lasting peace or experienced meaningful personal growth. More often, they are carefully managed images meant to convince others that life has never been better. The message they hope to send is simple. They want everyone, including you, to believe that losing you had no effect on them and that you were easily replaced. Behind all of that performance usually sits a much more fragile reality. The confident image exists to protect the insecurity that your quiet departure exposed. If they eventually return, they often avoid acting as though they are trying to win you back. Instead, they may present themselves as someone simply checking in, offering closure, or extending what appears to be a kind gesture. This approach protects their ego while quietly placing the emotional responsibility on you. Suddenly, you become the one expected to decide whether you will respond, forgive, or engage. That shift is intentional. It allows them to avoid appearing vulnerable while encouraging you to question your own boundaries. Stay with me, because what happens next explains why these messages often arrive when your life is finally becoming peaceful. One of the most confusing parts of this pattern is the timing. These delayed attempts to reconnect often appear when you are finally doing well. Your confidence has returned. Your emotions feel steadier. Your attention has shifted back toward your own life instead of theirs. That emotional independence becomes difficult for them to ignore because it signals that they no longer occupy the place they once held in your mind. Their message is rarely just about missing you. More often, it is a response to realizing that they are no longer the center of your emotional world. The timing is usually far from random. They often seem to appear just as your healing becomes more complete. The contact is less about rebuilding a healthy relationship and more about testing whether they still have a place in your thoughts. They want to know whether they can still influence your emotions in some way. At the same time, another process quietly unfolds inside their own mind. As they become more certain that you are not returning, they begin reshaping the story of the relationship. This is not always a deliberate plan. It often becomes a psychological necessity. The reality of what happened challenges the image they want to maintain of themselves, so the past gradually changes inside their memory. They struggle to hold on to the idea that they caused serious harm while also believing they are completely justified, superior, or faultless. Accepting that truth would require accountability, and accountability can bring emotions they find extremely difficult to face. Instead, their mind begins protecting them by changing the story itself. Don't miss this next part because it explains why conversations with them can leave you questioning your own memories. This rewriting of the past usually happens little by little. Painful events become smaller in their memory. Hurtful moments lose their emotional weight. Times when you expressed genuine pain may be remembered as overreactions. The boundaries you worked hard to establish become, in their version of events, examples of you being unfair or unreasonable. Their own harmful behavior is often reinterpreted as a reasonable response to your supposed mistakes. Over time, this altered version becomes the reality they genuinely believe. It is not always a matter of consciously inventing lies. Instead, their mind gradually edits memories in ways that protect their sense of self. For the person who lived through the relationship, this can feel deeply unsettling because they often speak with complete certainty about events you remember very differently. Their confidence may cause you to question your own experiences, especially if you spent years being told that your feelings, memories, or perceptions could not be trusted. That is why this revised history becomes more than a private coping mechanism. It also becomes a tool they use with other people. They may share this version of the story to explain their behavior, gain sympathy, or present themselves as someone who was misunderstood rather than someone who caused harm. This simplified narrative also allows them to avoid a normal grieving process. Healthy endings require accepting that both good and painful experiences existed at the same time. That emotional complexity can be difficult for them to tolerate. By reducing the relationship to a simple story where they were reasonable and you were the problem, they avoid feelings of regret, vulnerability, or genuine loss. Eventually, this rewritten history becomes the foundation for every future interaction. If they contact you again, months or years later, they often do so from this revised version of reality. Any apology may sound sincere on the surface, but it often lacks real depth because the full impact of their actions no longer exists in the story they tell themselves. That is why your healing depends less on convincing them to remember the past accurately and more on trusting your own experience. The peace you have built comes from honoring what you lived through, even when someone else chooses to rewrite the story. In the end, your memory does not need their agreement to remain true, and your future does not depend on their version of the past. It depends on your decision to keep moving forward without allowing someone else's rewritten history to replace your own reality. Taking responsibility often feels unnecessary to a toxic person because, in their mind, there is nothing to take responsibility for. That is why conversations about closure so often become exhausting, repetitive, and deeply frustrating. You are speaking from your real experiences, your memories, and the emotions you lived through. They are often speaking from a version of the past that has been reshaped to protect them from emotional discomfort. The two conversations never truly meet because they are happening from completely different realities. When they finally realize you are not coming back, their search for someone new is rarely about building a healthy relationship or finding lasting happiness. More often, it becomes an attempt to escape the uncomfortable feelings created by your absence. What they lose is not simply the relationship itself. They lose a source of emotional stability that they had come to rely on. Your presence once helped absorb emotional tension, supported the image they had of themselves, and gave them constant reassurance. Without that, they may experience growing restlessness, irritability, and inner instability. A new relationship can become a quick distraction from those feelings instead of an opportunity for genuine healing. That is why these new connections often move much faster than healthy relationships usually do. The closeness may appear intense almost immediately, but much of that intensity is built on speed rather than trust. They quickly mirror interests, offer excessive attention, and rush emotional closeness in an effort to recreate the control they recently lost. From the outside, it may look as though they have easily moved on, but what often appears to be a fresh beginning may actually be an attempt to cover the emotional impact of your departure. Stay with me because this next part explains why that quick replacement says far more about them than it ever does about you. Choosing someone new so quickly is not proof that you were easily replaced. In many cases, it reflects how difficult it is for them to spend meaningful time alone with their own thoughts. Solitude creates space for reflection, and reflection may bring uncomfortable questions they are not ready to face. A new relationship provides another source of attention, validation, and emotional focus, allowing them to avoid looking inward. As long as another person is responding, admiring, reassuring, or trying to please them, they can temporarily avoid confronting the deeper issues that remain unresolved. The new relationship often serves another purpose as well. Being seen with someone else helps reinforce the image they want the world to believe. They may hope others will see them as successful, desirable, or completely unaffected by the breakup. In that sense, the relationship can become more about appearance than genuine connection. The new partner may gradually find themselves expected to meet the same emotional demands that once fell on you. They may be asked directly or indirectly to provide constant reassurance, emotional support, and validation while carrying responsibilities that no single relationship can realistically sustain. Over time, the same unhealthy patterns often begin appearing again because the deeper issues were never truly addressed. The early excitement fades, feelings of entitlement become more visible, emotional expectations continue growing. The new person is not immune to these patterns because the central problem was never your value or your worth. The underlying struggle existed long before you arrived. Your decision to leave did not create the cycle. It simply revealed it. Don't miss this next point because it explains one of the quietest but most confusing reactions people often experience. Once they fully accept that you are not returning, they may enter a stage that appears to be complete emotional indifference. On the surface, it can look as though they no longer care at all. In reality, this behavior is not always a sign of healthy acceptance or emotional maturity. It can function as another protective strategy, helping them regain a sense of superiority after losing the control they once believed they had. By acting as though you never truly mattered, they attempt to reverse the emotional story. If they convince themselves that your absence has no importance, then leaving no longer feels like something that happened to them. Instead, it becomes something they can mentally frame as unimportant. This indifference is often exaggerated. It may appear as emotional coldness, complete avoidance of shared memories, or an unusual lack of reaction to significant events in your life. The message they hope to communicate is that your presence never made a difference. Yet beneath that performance often sits an unwillingness to acknowledge vulnerability. Admitting that someone mattered would require facing the pain of losing them, and that emotional honesty may feel overwhelming. At the same time, this distant behavior can have another purpose. It may quietly encourage you to question yourself, wonder whether you imagine the connection, or feel as though your experiences have been erased. If that self-doubt grows, they regain a sense of emotional influence without needing direct conflict. This is why protecting your own memories and trusting your lived experience becomes so important. Your healing does not depend on convincing someone else to validate what happened. It grows stronger each time you choose your own clarity over their confusion, your own peace over their performance, and your own future over the emotional patterns that once kept you trapped. In the end, the greatest freedom comes not from changing their story but from refusing to let it become your own.